Right, well, we're here at Heddingham Castle with one of the members of the game development team for Total War Thrones of Britannia, Total War Sagas. Why don't you introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what you do?
I'm Jack Lussard, I'm the game director on Thrones of Britannia.
Right. So, for anybody who doesn't know anything about Thrones of Britannia, what is it that makes this Total War Saga series different from the other Total War games that you've done before?
So the Saga series is really a chance for us to do more focused stories and games on time periods that might not justify like a big sweeping title like a Rome 2 or aren't as focused around a single character as Attila was, for example. It's more taking those juicy periods of history where there's a lot of interesting stuff going on and giving them the focus they deserve.
And so you've obviously chosen the struggle for the uniting the kingdoms of Britannia under one throne as the game period for this one. Because there were a lot of different factions involved trying to unite the kingdoms of Britannia under one crown. So what do we have to look forward to?
Well, I mean, yes, there's 10 playable factions, and there's a lot of other factions on the map as well. We've really gone into the history to make sure that we're reflecting the political breakdown of the time. Like, maps of the time will often show Wessex as this big, continuous section on the south of England when it was, like, Cornwall had just been conquered, wasn't really fully integrated yet, and then you've got all the different areas governed by different earls and stuff who, whilst part of the kingdom, maybe if things had gone wrong, wouldn't have remained part of the kingdom.
Yeah. So the loyalty was a little suspect. Yeah. And that's a mechanic in the game as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something that I learned to hate in Total War Warhammer 2 with the Skaven. Yeah, but you know, it's one of those things that if that's the route you're going to take, you have to plan around it. That we also have lots of, obviously, most of the north of England was colonised and invaded by our Scandinavian neighbours, who we're all very friendly with now.
They're a lot more peaceful now.
It's a lot more peaceful now. You know, they kind of worked it out of their system in the Middle Ages. Although the Swedish had a bit of a throw in the 1800s as well, but they kind of worked it out, and now they're all jolly nice people, and very good in online gaming. But at the time period we're talking about, they were a major threat to British stability.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because we're set just after the last big chance the great Viking army's been stopped at the Battle of Edington by Alfred the Great. So now the great Viking army is ruling lands which is full of the English. They've got a balance between keeping their armies happy and keeping the English happy as they're trying to sort of assimilate into the native culture.
They've got all these English vassals.
Yeah.
And they don't like rebellions very much.
No, so you've got it's one of a lovely unique mechanic for the Great Viking Army is this constant struggle between trying to keep both happy. So if you can keep both happy, you can get bonuses from both, but if you get it wrong, you're going to face a lot of trouble keeping your faction together.
And while we're on the subject of Vikings, because as we all know, Hollywood is a great teacher of history. I've been playing the game all day and I haven't seen a single horned helmet. What's all that about?
Alas, we have Wagner to blame on that in his operas.
So it's the German opera. It wasn't actually Hollywood. I stand corrected. I thought Hollywood were to blame. What was the Richard Curtis and Charlton? The Vikings, I think they called it. Big furry coats, horned helmets everywhere. But no, apparently they got the idea from Richard Wagner in his Ring Cycle.
Yes, the operas he put on.
The operas, all right. So
Germany,
stop it. Well, anyway, I have to say, I think I've been playing it all day. I think this is the most accessible of the Total War games that I've played so far. And I'll wait for it to come out, which is happening
April 19th.
Hooray!
It's available for pre-order now on Steam.
You heard it here first. And that is why I found myself on a very cold February morning at Heddingham Castle in Essex, the site of what is arguably the best preserved Norman keep in all of England. The fortifications and outbuildings date back to around the year 1100, and the keep to around the year 1140. The keep stands nearly 70 feet tall, covers 5 stories, and the Great Banqueting Hall, which occupies 2 of those stories, is also home to the largest known surviving Norman arch in all of England. And so it was this location that Creative Assembly picked to show off the latest in the Total War series, Thrones of Britannia. So how about some of that gameplay? I decided I was going to load the Northumberland Campaign. There are 10 playable factions in Thrones of Britannia, and since I'm actually from Northumberland in the northeast of England, I thought, well, there's just no other choice, is there? Unfortunately, I did feel a little conflicted, because at this point in history, most of the northeast of England was firmly under the control of the King of the Danes. You see, Despite the fact that we were actually playing this game in a Norman castle, the game is set prior to the events of the Norman conquest in the year 1066. It actually begins in the year 878 AD, which was right after the great Viking invasions. This was a period in British history where the Vikings, and we're mostly talking about the Danes here, had decided that all this to and fro across the North Sea in order to get to good pillaging country in England was just a little bit more effort than was actually required, and wouldn't it be a good idea if instead they came to stay? Playing as the Vikings, you get all kinds of bonuses when you're fighting their hated enemy, the Anglo Saxons, who were fairly dominant in Britain from the 5th century all the way up to 1066. In the period of history covered by Thrones of Britannia, historically it was the Anglo Saxons who came out on top, at least until the year 1066, when William the Conqueror arrived from Normandy and put his own stamp on British cultural identity. Which is kind of ironic when you think about it, because the poor old Anglo Saxons, who were originally German tribesmen, who migrated over to England from continental Europe, had finally managed to unite, if not all of Britannia, then at least most of England, against the hated Viking invaders from the north, only to find themselves getting their asses kicked by the Normans, who were not actually French, even though they obviously came from Normandy, which is part of France. If you were to call a Norman a Frenchman to his face, he would probably stick an axe in your head. Around the beginning of the 10th century, the French king, Charles the Simple, love that name, gave some land in the north of France to a Viking chief who went by the name of Rollo, in the hope that they would settle down and stop pillaging the French coastline. The land that he gave to these Vikings became known as Northumberland, the land of the Northmen, and was later shortened to Normandy. So the poor old Anglo Saxons had spent hundreds of years successfully uniting England under an Anglo-Saxon king against these Northmen invaders, only to get themselves once again invaded and conquered by yet more Vikings, this time from the south. Although if you were to play Thrones of Britannia as the Anglo-Saxons, there might be something that you could do about that. Once we reach the year 1066, of course, all bets are off. Although the content that currently exists in Thrones of Britannia stops at the year 1066, you don't have to stop playing at the year 1066. You can continue playing until either your faction is wiped out or you win. And there's not just the two factions, it's not just the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. You can play as the Irish, you can play as the Scots, you can play as the Welsh. There are other English kingdoms that you can play, such as the kingdoms of Wessex and Mercia. And if you quite like the idea of playing the Vikings, but you think this whole settling down business is just a little bit too much pussying around, you can play as the Viking Sea Kings, whose most important fortified coastal base was historically what is now known as modern-day Dublin in Ireland, and are likely to prove a significant problem for anybody seeking to claim the title of High King of the Irish. I do have to say, I am seriously impressed with the graphics engine. I mean, just look at the detail on, well, everything. I mean, it's hard to just pick one thing out and say, wow, look at that. I have to admit, the history nerd in me did get a little excited when I saw the village stone quarry here. The history nerd in me started tripping when I saw what looked like Neolithic standing stones being quarried. They're not, they're just raw blocks of masonry, and in any case I'm at least 2,000 years out. Because Stonehenge, on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, one of the most famous Neolithic structures in the world, which we really know very little about, other than the fact that the stone that was used for the construction of the blue stones at Stonehenge was not native to the area of Salisbury Plain where they were erected, and was in fact quarried from a stone mine in Wales, pretty much just like the one in this Welsh village, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, because that stone had to be hauled 200 miles, and how the hell they managed that is anybody's guess. That displays a level of dedication to building a Neolithic alarm clock that I just can't relate to. Meanwhile, I'm moving some troops up to try to get eyes on what Welsh forces are waiting for me in this village, using the cover provided by the forest to get a flanking force into position. And we've already spotted some of the enemy troops. Now, if I win this battle, this is actually going to trigger the long victory for my faction. There are 3 different ways of winning the game, regardless of which faction you play. You can either have a Conquest Victory, which is fairly straightforward, just beat everybody else. You can have a Fame Victory, where you have to grow your reputation, so build famous churches, gain certain character skills, and conquest helps as well. And then you've got the Kingdom Victory, and this is the victory type that's probably going to appeal most to the history buffs, because the Kingdom Victories are tailored individually to each faction based on what those factions' historical aspirations actually were. And all 3 of those victory types have both a short and a long version, with the long version obviously being harder to achieve. And if I can win this battle, it's going to trigger the long victory for the Viking faction of Northumbria. But even then, it's not game over. I mean, it can be. You can choose to stop playing at that point, but you can keep going, at which point you're going to have to win an ultimate victory. What the hell's an ultimate victory condition? Well, I did say earlier that the game period covered starts in the year 878, and then the content that is currently in the game kind of stops around the year 1066, although you can continue playing if you're still struggling along when the year 1066 rolls around. But the historical content in the game kind of stops at that point, which was a very significant point in British history because that was the year of the Norman invasion. Now, when you win a long victory of any type and trigger the ultimate victory scenario, you're going to face an invasion by hordes of foreign invaders. And depending on the faction that you've chosen, if you start from territory mostly located in the north, so for example the Gaelic tribes in Scotland, you're going to be facing hordes of Norse raiders. If you hold territory mostly in the Midlands, you're going to be facing Danish invaders. And if you hold territory mostly located in the south, so the Anglo Saxons, you're going to have to face the Norman conquest. So despite the fact that the content in the game does actually stop at the year 1066, if you control an Anglo Saxon faction and you manage to successfully mirror the historical events that occurred in Britain during this time period, if you do a King Alfred the Great, for example, and manage to unite the Anglo-Saxon tribes under one king, you're still going to have to deal with the events of 1066. Unless, of course, you're playing on legendary difficulty, in which case you're going to have to fight the Norsemen, the Danes, and the Normans. All at the same time. Good luck with that. Right, anyway, troops finally in position. Got my flanking forces hidden in the forest. We've got eyes on the Welsh forces, who are holding the centre of the village. We have them pretty well outnumbered. I think it's time to go in and put an end to the reign of King Llewellyn of Glysewig and trigger the long victory condition for my Viking faction. Go on, boys, get stuck in. Kick their bloody heads in. So, while the Welsh defenders are reacting to the main force which has appeared, I've still got this flanking force hidden in the woods which has so far remained undetected, and they're not particularly good troops, which was why I risked losing them, moving them up into that flanking position. But now they've got the ideal opportunity to emerge from the woods, occupy the high ground at the rear there, and give these Welshmen a spot of surprise butt sex. Aye aye, where do you think you're going, sunshine? Unit of scout horsemen here trying to take my axemen in the flank. We need to get them wheeled around to meet the charge, and then we'll give them a bit of support with a unit of skirmishers to the rear who are equipped with javelins. So that should see off the threat to the flank. The rest of the infantry are getting stuck in to the Welsh infantry. So we've got all of our missile troops pretty well covered here. So we're going to set them to work peppering the Welsh reserves with missile fire while moving these regiments up to engage the Welsh rear that is currently being hassled by that unit, or two units of Levy spearmen who have just emerged from the forest and been discovered. Looks like we've seen that regiment of scout horsemen off pretty convincingly. Right, what are these guys up to? Let's take out those Welsh hunters, or at least attempt to. These are Welsh longbowmen. Very, very dangerous at range, not so much in a punching fight. These poor buggers only really have daggers to defend themselves with. So it looks like it's going to be a bad day for Jones the Bowman, especially since fresh troops have just appeared to their rear, including some long axemen. Although, oh, hold on a second, there's another line of Welsh skirmishers to their rear, and my levy spearmen have successfully seen off the Welsh hunters, so let's get these guys turned around. Look at that. I think we can probably spare a unit or two from that massive blob that's currently stomping the shit out of that very unfortunate unit of Welsh skirmishers to come over here to the centre to help seal the fate of the poor old Welsh king, who on the whole is probably wishing he hadn't bothered to get out of bed today. Enemy elite cavalry is actually doing quite well against those levy long axemen, so we're going to give them some support. Victory through superior firepower and all that. Tactics are for noobs. We're just going to charge everybody in there, since they're not really doing an awful lot back here. Assign a unit to engage that unit of Welsh levy spearmen who are just sort of milling around at the back while coming under concentrated missile fire. You can see they're raising their shields over there, trying to protect themselves from the fire from my archers to their rear. But this is the fight we need to win. Somewhere in that blob is the enemy general. Oh, and it looks like we've just had a unit break, but we've managed to put the enemy general down. And that's obviously going to have disastrous consequences for the morale of the surviving Welshmen, who are trying to rally, but there's just no way. So with this battle brought to a successful conclusion and the last remaining outpost of the Welsh kingdoms in flames, we have united all of the north of England, all of the Midlands, all of Wales and large portions of the south of England under the banner of the Vikings, and that's a long victory for the Viking faction. Of course, you don't have to stop playing there. You can continue and try to win the ultimate victory. But if you want to see what that's like, you're just going to have to get the game for yourself. And while I wasn't able to celebrate my victory in true medieval fashion with a good old spot of ravishing and pillaging, Creative Assembly did at least go to the trouble of putting on a proper medieval banquet for us in Heddingham Castle's great banqueting hall, where we were joined by none other than YouTuber Lindy Beige, who had also been invited down for a quick look at the game.
Tankard, so that you could see the King's Shilling up in the bottom and not be caught by the trick. Oh, right, and so here I go for some a flagon of mead, and this is what I look like when I'm fit.
Have yourself a good quaff there.
Yeah, it's sweet enough. It's definitely sweet enough.
Hooray.
Hooray.
Thank you, Lindy Beige, for that mead quaffing demonstration, and don't worry, I did plenty of quaffing of my own as well. I've never actually had mead before. This was the first time for me, and it's actually pretty nice. But anyway, that's Total War Sagas, Thrones of Britannia. Available on Steam on the 19th of April, although you can pre-order it should you choose right now. I very much liked this game. I mean, I pretty much like all of Creative Assembly's Total War titles, some more than others, but I definitely like this one, and that was by no means guaranteed. You might be sitting there thinking, well, Jingles, you're British, you're obviously going to like a game called Thrones of Britannia, but they could have gotten it wrong and triggered me. Because I am a history nerd. But, well, for one thing, there wasn't a single horned helmet in sight, and by and large, I think they've done a very, very good job on this particular title. And hopefully, you'll agree. That was Total War Sagas, Thrones of Britannia by Creative Assembly. I'd like to thank them for inviting me down to Heddingham Castle in Essex and putting on this preview day for me. I had a lot of fun. Not just playing the game. Heddingham Castle itself was absolutely fantastic, and it was nice to actually meet Lindy Beige properly for the very first time. I have actually run into him before at Tankfest, but we just kind of waved at each other across a sea of people, so it was nice to actually spend some time with the guy and get to know him. And hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, and you're going to have a fantastic weekend, because that's it for today. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.